There are moments that mark us in ways we never expect, small instances that shatter our assumptions and set us on a brand new path. On the dusty roads of the open range, Ethan Hall thought he'd left all his surprises behind when tragedy tore his family apart. But one starlit evening, in the flickering shadows of his wagon, he made a discovery that would change his life forever. A young girl, barely 12, curled up in tattered clothes and trembling from the chill of the desert night. Little did he know her presence would ignite a chain of events as wild as the West itself. Ethan Hall was a widower at 35, an age he never expected to be wearing mourning clothes or raising a small ranch on the outskirts of Abilene all on his own. His beloved wife Clara had passed away from a fever 2 years earlier, leaving behind a broken-hearted man struggling with debt and land that refused to yield the crops he desperately needed. He earned his keep by working part-time for neighboring ranchers, transporting goods in his old covered wagon. It was a rickety contraption, but it was the last tangible piece of a life he once shared with Clara. Early that dawn, he crawled out of the wagon after a restless night spent by a dying campfire. His horse Marigold snorted at him in mild irritation, perhaps because she was hungry, or simply annoyed that Ethan had picked yet another rough place to rest. Stretching out the stiffness in his limbs, Ethan took note of the stillness of the prairie. Pale pink skies, dew-kissed grass and the breeze rolling softly over the plains. Then he heard a muffled whimper. Startled, Ethan swung around to investigate the underside of his wagon. There he glimpsed a small shape, a child asleep, or more accurately, half-conscious. Her scraggly brown hair covered her dirty face, and her shoulders shook as she tried to stifle sobs. She was just a slip of a girl, no more than 12 years old, wearing worn-out boots and a tattered gingham dress, far too thin for the cold desert nights. Ethan stood there, stunned into silence. Concern and curiosity waged war in his mind. Who was she, and what was she doing sleeping under his wagon? His heart thumped heavily, uncertain of what to do next. But one thing was clear. He couldn't leave her out in the cold. Ethan knelt gently near the girl, mindful not to startle her further. Up close, he could see the bruises on her arms and the exhaustion that hollowed out her cheeks. She flinched at his approach, but managed to keep her eyes locked on him with a curious mixture of fear and defiance. "Hey there," he said, softly, pushing aside a strand of hair from her face. "You hungry?" A growl from her stomach answered more convincingly than any words she might have spoken. Carefully he lifted her from beneath the wagon and settled her near the smoldering remains of the campfire. The desert's night chill still clung to the early morning air. Ethan rummaged in a small burlap sack for something edible. He found a half-eaten loaf of bread, a strip of salted beef, and a small wedge of cheese meager rations, but better than nothing. The girl eyed him warily. Despite her obvious hunger, she snatched the food only after a long, tense pause. She ate quietly, as if she expected any moment that he might try to yank it away. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. Whatever her story, it clearly wasn't pleasant. He realized he still didn't know her name. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She froze. Her gaze flicked to the horizon, as though considering if it was safe to answer. Finally, she swallowed a piece of bread and mumbled Mary. "Mary Jenkins?" Ethan nodded, though something about her response felt rehearsed. Yet he let it pass. They had to start somewhere. "I'm Ethan Hall. You alone out here, Mary?" A flicker of pain darted across her eyes. She nodded, hugging her arms protectively. No matter her secrets, Ethan's heart wouldn't allow him to turn her away. Not now. Not ever. As the sun crested the horizon, Ethan helped Mary onto the wagon and guided Marigold along a dirt path that wound through rolling plains dotted with prickly pear cacti and scrub brush. The plan was to head back to his modest homestead, or what was left of it. He didn't have much to offer, but it was better than leaving Mary to fend for herself. During the ride, Mary barely spoke, but Ethan noticed the way she constantly glanced behind them. Fear as tangible as the scorching midday sun glinted in her eyes. He tried to ease her tension with gentle conversation, telling her about his wife and the small ranch he inherited from his late father, but her replies remained monosyllabic. Still beneath her guarded exterior, Ethan sensed a yearning to trust someone. She was just too afraid to let down her guard. Approaching Abilene, Ethan decided to take a detour through town first. He hoped to buy some extra supplies, fresh bread, some canned peaches if they had them, maybe even a new blanket for Mary. He also felt it wise to check in with Dr. Vance, an old friend who'd treated Clara in her final days. If Mary needed medical attention, that was the only place he trusted. He worried about the bruises on her arms and the haunted look in her eyes. But as they neared the outskirts, Mary tensed up. She tugged on Ethan's sleeve, eyes darting to the row of buildings that formed Abilene's modest main street. "Please, don't take me there," she whispered, her voice cracking in desperation. Ethan's brow furrowed. "Mary, it's just a quiet town. We'll be safe." "You need know." She shook her head vehemently, tears threatening. "I can't be seen. Please, I can't." Something in her voice, pure raw terror, made him grip the reins tighter. Ethan had no choice but to keep riding. He was beginning to suspect that Mary's story was entangled with dangers he couldn't yet fathom. Ethan's homestead sprawled across a few acres of tough soil and patchy grass. The main house was a simple cabin of weathered logs and chipped paint, bearing the history of countless seasons of scorching heat and bitter snowstorms. Behind it sat the barn, an aging structure with a sagging roof that threatened to collapse on a windy day. Only the corral fence still looked sturdy thanks to Ethan's frequent repairs. With nothing more to greet them than a lonely windmill creaking and a few stray chickens pecking around the yard. The place felt lonely, but it was home. He helped Mary off the wagon. She looked around, eyes roving over the property, with a mix of relief and trepidation. It was as though she expected men to jump out from behind every bale of hay or corner of the barn. When he offered her a seat on the porch, she chose instead to stand by a barrel near the front door, arms crossed protectively. Ethan busied himself with chores all the while, casting sidelong glances at Mary. He fed Marigold, making sure his old horse got a well-deserved rest, and hauled water from the well. The tension in the air was thick, but every so often, Mary would follow him with her eyes, as if trying to figure out whether he was to be trusted. Finally, Ethan decided to break the silence. "If you don't want to head into town, that's fine for now. But Mary, if you're in trouble, I need to know." She looked away, chewing her lip. "I can't say." Her answer did nothing to quell Ethan's growing apprehension. He thought about the days ahead. How could he protect a scared child if he didn't even understand the threat? The land could be harsh, but whatever haunted Mary's past seemed harsher still. After settling Mary in the modest cabin, Ethan rummaged through an old trunk where he kept a few quilts and Clara's well-worn clothing that he couldn't bring himself to discard. He found a thick blanket warm enough to stave off the cold desert nights and handed it to Mary, who accepted it with a hesitant nod. Her gratitude was unspoken, but palpable. They spent the rest of the afternoon in a careful dance around each other. Ethan tried to check the bruises on her arms, but she pulled away, muttering that she was fine. He observed that while she was grateful for food and shelter, she was keenly watchful. She seemed to be waiting for something, perhaps a betrayal, perhaps a rescue. Ethan couldn't be sure. That evening, as dusk settled, Mary went to wash her face in a small basin near the barn. Curious, Ethan took the opportunity to examine her belongings, which she had left near the trunk. A single battered satchel was all she owned. He didn't want to pry, but he found himself kneeling beside it, noticing a corner of paper sticking out. Without thinking, he pulled the paper free. It was a crumpled piece of parchment that looked like an old map. Half of it was missing, torn away. Strange, swirling lines indicated some route leading from Abilene toward the mountains in the west. The only marking he could read clearly was Sienna Wells, a name unknown to him. Before he could delve deeper, Mary stepped into the doorway. He shoved the map back, heart pounding with guilt. She stared at him, eyes glinting with anger and fear. He quickly rose to his feet, holding out his hands in a placating gesture. But words failed him. The lines of trust they had, tentatively begun to forge, seemed to snap in that moment. The tension lasted well into the next day. Mary avoided Ethan's eyes. She ate her breakfast in pensive silence, refusing to speak. Guilt gnawed at him, even though he genuinely believed he needed to understand her secrets to keep her safe. Unable to remain idle, Ethan took to mending the fence around the corral, hoping a repetitive task might clear his head. Memories of rumors drifted through his mind. Names whispered in saloons like Jesse James and the Younger Brothers, and how the country was still crawling with outlaws, despite the Pinkerton Agency's best efforts. He remembered reading about how some outlaws had kids and families hidden away. Could Mary be connected to one of them? That afternoon, as Ethan hammered nails into the fence, a wagon approached the property, stirring up clouds of dust. At the reins was a familiar face, Jeremiah Alcott, a local rancher, and one of Ethan's few remaining friends. Jeremiah tipped his hat, friendly but serious. "I heard you were back in town and wanted to see how you were holding up," Jeremiah said, dismounting. "Heard from Dr. Vance. You didn't drop by your usual stop. Everything all right?" Ethan forced a smile. "Been busy. Trying to keep the ranch in shape." Mary, peering from behind the door, shrank back, refusing to be seen. Noticing this, Jeremiah frowned. "You got company? Or is that your imagination playing tricks on me?" Ethan hesitated, recalling Mary's frantic plea not to be exposed. "No, just someone who needed a place to stay for a while. She's shy." Jeremiah opened his mouth to inquire further, but seemed to hold his tongue. Instead, he asked if Ethan had heard any new rumors about a band of outlaws camped in the hills west of Abilene. According to Jeremiah, they were led by a dangerous man with a hefty bounty on his head. Ethan feigned ignorance, yet a cold, unsettling feeling blossomed inside him. The puzzle pieces were aligning too well, and he feared Mary might be right at the center. That night the air felt heavier, as if a thunderstorm brewed beyond the horizon, even though the sky was clear. Inside the cabin, Mary huddled next to the fireplace, her eyes flickering with the orange glow of embers. Ethan sat across from her, exhaustion weighing on his shoulders. The day's events replayed in his mind. Jeremiah's visit, the mention of outlaws in the hills, and Mary's frightened gaze. He mustered his courage. "Mary," he said gently, "I'm not going to pretend I understand your situation, but if you're in trouble, I want to help, even if it means crossing lines I normally wouldn't cross." She looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. Slowly, she began to speak, her voice trembling, as if each word was a betrayal of some vow she'd made. She confessed that her real name wasn't Mary Jenkins, she'd lied. Her name was Lily Rourke. Her father was Conrad Rourke, and that name alone caused Ethan's heart to skip a beat. Conrad Rourke was a wanted man. Stories of his robberies and rumored ties to the Jesse James gang were whispered across Kansas and beyond. Pinkerton posters promised a substantial reward for information on his whereabouts. Lily admitted she'd been traveling with her father's gang for weeks, ever since he showed up out of the blue, demanding she come with him. But the last robbery had gone horribly wrong. Gunshots were fired in a Wells Fargo stage holdup near Dodge City. Men died, and her father's gang scattered. Lily found herself alone, frightened, and lost in the prairie. She broke down, sobbing, clutching the blanket around her. I just want to be safe, she managed between shuddering breaths. I don't know if he's alive or dead. But I'm scared that the law or someone else, someone worse, will find me first. Ethan reached out to her trembling hands. No matter the risk, he knew he couldn't abandon her now. Ethan felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Anger at Conrad Rourke for putting his daughter in danger. Shock that a quiet child could be tangled up in such a notorious web, and a protective urge that he couldn't quite explain. He stared into the dying embers in the fireplace, trying to piece together a plan. Lily, he said, letting her real name linger in the air if your father's wanted by the law. You must know that staying with me could be dangerous. If the Pinkertons find out I'm harboring you. She sniffled, wiping tears away with the back of her hand. I don't have anywhere else to go. I can't go into town, and I'm afraid of the outlaws that were with my father. Some of them wanted to use me as leverage. Her voice trembled, recounting an unspoken threat. Ethan set his jaw. No one will hurt you here, he promised, though a part of him questioned if it was a promise he could keep. His finances were on shaky ground. The ranch was barely scraping by. Yet he couldn't turn his back on a frightened child. He remembered a friend from his youth, Henry Bledsoe, who had once worked as a Pinkerton detective before turning to run a security firm in Wichita. Maybe Henry could help discreetly provide some clarity on Conrad Rourke's status. But that meant traveling, and Lily had made it clear she feared being seen. Look, Ethan said, standing up slowly. We'll figure this out. For now, stay inside the ranch. If anyone shows up, let me do the talking. We keep your identity to ourselves until we know more. Lily nodded, relief and terror mingling in her eyes. Outside, the wind blew in a soft moan across the plains, as if echoing the secrets now revealed. The next morning, Ethan was up before sunrise, coaxing a small fire in the hearth to life, and trying not to wake Lily. He brewed coffee, the bitterness sharpening his senses, and contemplated his plan. Perhaps he could send a telegram to Henry Bledsoe, but that would require riding into Abilene. Lily's panic at the very mention of town made him pause. Was there another way? He was still pondering this when a pounding on the door jolted him. At first he thought it might be Jeremiah Alcott again, but when he opened the door, he was greeted by the stern face of Sheriff Gideon Roberts. Roberts was a tall man, with a salt and pepper beard, known for his unwavering commitment to the law. Standing behind him were two deputies, hats in hand, eyes scanning the property. Morning Ethan, the sheriff, began tone polite but unyielding. We're here on official business. We got word that Conrad Rourke might be in these parts, and we're checking every homestead within a day's ride of Abilene. Ethan's heart lurched, but he forced a calm demeanor. "Sheriff, I've heard the rumors, but I haven't seen any sign of him." Roberts studied Ethan's face carefully. "You sure there's a rumor going around that a young girl was spotted near the outskirts of town, matching the description of Rourke's daughter?" At the mention of Lily, Ethan gripped the doorframe tighter. "I'd tell you if I saw anything, Sheriff. Mind if we take a look around?" Panic fluttered in Ethan's stomach. He hesitated, but refusing would only raise more suspicion. So he stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. As the sheriff and deputies began inspecting the cabin, Ethan prayed that Lily had the good sense to stay hidden. His pulse thundered in his ears. One slip, and everything would come crashing down. Lily, hearing the commotion, had crept into the storage area under the floorboards, an old root cellar accessible through a hidden trap door beneath a worn rug. It wasn't exactly a secret. It was just rarely used since the orchard had failed years ago. Ethan spotted the subtle displacement of the rug's corner and breathed a small sigh of relief. Sheriff Roberts strode through the cabin, peering at shelves. Opening the trunk, where Clara's old clothes were kept, and even checking the narrow sleeping cot. The deputies fanned out, scanning every dark corner. "Thought you'd have more supplies here," one deputy commented, noting the near-bare pantry. Ethan forced a rueful shrug. "Times have been lean. I sometimes earn extra coin hauling supplies, so I stock up as I go." The sheriff moved toward the fireplace, pausing near the rug. Ethan's heart practically seized in his chest. With slow deliberation, Roberts nudged it aside, revealing the worn wooden planks. He knocked on them with his boot, and the hollow sound echoed. Ethan felt sweat trickle down his neck. But the sheriff just shifted his gaze back to Ethan. "You been all alone out here?" Roberts asked. The question weighed heavily, insinuating more than a casual inquiry. Ethan swallowed hard, nodded. "Haven't had much company since my wife passed, except for a neighbor dropping by now and then." For a moment, Roberts held Ethan's gaze, as if trying to peer into his soul. Then, with a curt nod, he signaled the deputies. "All right, boys. Looks like we got nothing here." Ethan exhaled slowly as the men left the front door, closing behind them. He waited until the sheriff's horses galloped away, before he carefully lifted the rug. Lily's wide eyes stared up at him from the darkness of the root cellar. Relief and fear mingled in their gaze, an unspoken understanding that their lives had just become even more entwined. After the sheriff's visit, Ethan knew they couldn't hide forever. The dusty plains were rife with rumors and watchful eyes, and Lily's presence would be impossible to conceal if more people started searching. Deciding that secrecy was no longer enough, he resolved to get some answers about Conrad Rourke. In the fading light of late afternoon, he sat Lily at the worn kitchen table. He laid out his plan. He would ride to Abilene under the cover of darkness to send a telegram to Henry Bledsoe in Wichita. He would ask about Rourke's latest whereabouts and whether there was any safe haven for Lily. Meanwhile, Lily would remain at the ranch, concealed in the root cellar, if anyone came poking around. "I know it's risky," Ethan explained, "but Henry's the only Pinkerton contact I trust not to turn you in on sight. He went independent, started a security outfit. He might have information or at least resources." Lily's face was pale, but she nodded. "I trust you," she said softly, words that carried immense weight. For a child who had been living in fear, it was a rare moment of vulnerability. To prepare, Ethan cooked a quick meal of beans and salt pork. While they ate, he noticed how Lily's guarded demeanor had softened slightly. Every once in a while, she'd risk a small, grateful smile. It reminded him of the fatherly warmth he once felt for a future child. he never got to have with Clara. After supper, Ethan saddled Marigold. Lily stood by the cabin door, hands wrung together in nervous anxiety. Before he rode off, she swallowed hard and said, "Please, be careful." He nodded, tipping his hat in what he hoped was a reassuring gesture. Then, with a snap of the reins, he rode into the dark, uncertain night, the distant lights of Abilene calling him. Ethan arrived in Abilene after midnight, taking care to keep a low profile. The town's main street, lined with wooden sidewalks, saloons, and shops, was mostly deserted at this hour. Only the flickering lanterns outside the Prairie Lily Saloon and the muffled sounds of drunken revelers hinted at any lingering activity. He tied Marigold behind a feed store, away from prying eyes. The telegraph office was a small building adjacent to the train station, which was quiet as a cemetery at this time of night. As he approached, he spotted a single light burning inside. Relief washed over him. Old Mr. Tomlinson, the station's caretaker, was known to keep odd hours. Pushing the door open gently, Ethan stepped inside. The smell of ink and paper tickled his nostrils. Tomlinson looked up from behind a high desk spectacles perched precariously on his nose. Recognition lit the man's tired eyes. "Well, if it ain't Ethan Hall," he greeted, though not with a smile. "Bit late for sending wires, don't you think?" Ethan did his best to look casual. "Important business. Need to get a message to Wichita." Tomlinson shrugged and handed him a form. Ethan wrote down the telegram address for Henry Bledsoe, carefully phrasing his words. "Henry Stop, need info on CR Stop. Urgent. Stop. Contact me soon. Stop E. Hall." Tomlinson frowned at the brevity, but didn't pry. He tapped out the message on the telegraph key, the clack of metal sounding dangerously loud in the otherwise silent station. Once it was done, Ethan paid a few coins, thanked Tomlinson, and slipped back into the night. As he rounded the corner by the saloon, he noticed a figure in a long duster, leaning against the wall, half hidden in shadow. The figure tipped his hat, a silent acknowledgement that made Ethan's hair stand on end. Something was off. Had the man been watching him, not wanting to risk a confrontation? Ethan ducked into the nearest alley, heart pounding. He prayed that he hadn't just attracted the wrong kind of attention. Ethan waited in the darkness, his back pressed against the rough wooden planks of an abandoned building. He listened for footsteps, for any sign that the stranger was following him. But all he heard was distant laughter from the saloon and the occasional clop of a horse's hooves. Maybe the man wasn't following him at all, but the paranoia refused to subside. Determined to avoid any further run-ins, Ethan took the back alleys that crisscrossed behind the shops. The moonlit path was riddled with crates and stray cats, but at least it offered some cover. He needed to get back to Marigold and head home to Lily. As he neared the feed store, he turned a corner and almost collided with a figure in a familiar tan vest, Deputy Callahan, one of Sheriff Roberts' men. The deputy's hand went instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Whoa there, Ethan." "Deputy," Callahan said, eyebrows furrowed. "What are you doing sneaking around at this hour?" Ethan forced a laugh. "Just picking up a few supplies. It's quieter at night." Callahan's gaze slid over Ethan's shoulder, scanning the darkness. He wasn't buying the explanation, not completely. "Didn't know the feed store did business past midnight," he remarked, crossing his arms. Ethan felt sweat beading on his brow. I was just on my way out after a late visit to Mr. Tomlinson's place, sending a wire. Is that a crime now?" The deputy held his stare a moment longer, then exhaled. "If you say so, Ethan. Just be careful. sheriffs rounding up folks to question about Rourke. Dangerous times. Ethan nodded, trying to steady his breath. I appreciate the concern. Deputy Callahan gave a final searching look before stepping aside. With as much calm as he could muster, Ethan continued toward Marigold. Every second spent in Abilene after dark felt like an eternity on a tightrope. The next few days passed in a slow blur of anxiety and waiting. Lily stayed inside the cabin, venturing out only at night to help Ethan with chores under the moonlight. They spoke in hushed tones, forging a fragile sense of companionship. Midweek, an old courier named Samuel Wardlow rode up to the homestead with a telegram in hand. Ethan's heart raced when he saw the sealed note. Wardlow was a retired stagecoach driver who sometimes did side work delivering messages to rural areas. He tipped his floppy hat and handed Ethan the folded slip of paper. I won't pry, but folks in town are wondering why you're getting wires from Wichita, he said, leaning in. Times are stirring, Ethan. Hope you're keeping out of trouble. Ethan forced a grin. No worries, Sam. Just business. Once Wardlow ambled away, Ethan opened the telegram with trembling fingers. Ethan, stop. Rourke reported near Dodge City. Stop. Bounty hunters involved. Stop daughter. Seen with him last week. Stop dangerous. Manhunt underway. Stop. Advise caution. Stop. Henry. Ethan reread the lines, a knot forming in his stomach. According to Henry, Conrad Rourke had been spotted near Dodge City, but the rumor that Lily had been seen with him was weeks old. It seemed like the news hadn't caught up to the fact that Lily was no longer with her father. He showed the telegram to Lily inside the cabin. She sat on the edge of the cot, reading it through wide eyes. He's alive, she whispered, a mix of relief and dread. She chewed her lip, brow furrowed. But if bounty hunters are after him, they might come after me to find him. Ethan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. We'll figure this out. One step at a time. But he could almost feel the noose tightening around them. Each rumor another strand that threatened to ensnare Lily in a violent showdown. As nights turned colder, Ethan and Lily barricaded the doors and windows, the flicker of lamplight barely enough to dispel the gloom. The hush of the prairie at night felt more ominous than ever. Ethan found himself waking at odd hours, convinced he heard hoofbeats or hushed voices outside. But it was only the rustle of wind through the dry grass. Until one night, it wasn't. It was past midnight when Lily shook him awake. Her face glowed with panic in the lantern light. Someone's outside, she whispered. I heard horses. They've stopped near the barn. Ethan jolted upright, grabbing his shotgun from where it rested by the bed. With Lily trailing close behind, he eased open the door to the porch. The silhouette of a man stood by the barn lantern, swaying in the breeze. Another figure waited on horseback, half cloaked by darkness. Who's there? Ethan called, keeping the shotgun at the ready. Name's Tom Blevins, came a gruff reply. Looking for Conrad Rourke. Heard he might have come this way. Ethan's heart pounded. He could smell trouble on the air. No Rourke here. Best move on, he barked, keeping his voice steady. Blevins moved forward, the lantern revealing a scar slashing across his weather-beaten face. You callin' me a liar, friend? He spat on the ground. Word is he's got a kid. Girl about so high. He raised a hand to chest level. Ethan's jaw tightened. I already told the sheriff I ain't seen him. Now get off my land. A tense silence followed, broken only by the stamping of the horse. Then the second figure spoke a low voice, dripping with menace. We're all after that bounty. If you got anything to hide, it won't end well." Ethan raised the shotgun a fraction, hoping to mask his own tremors. The confrontation felt like a lit fuse, threatening to explode at any moment. Blevins took a step closer, his hand hovering near the worn grip of his revolver. Ethan's heart pounded against his ribs, but he refused to back down. Inside, Lily crouched behind a table, fear shimmering in her eyes. "Don't make this a problem," Blevins' warned voice low. "We're just passing through. But if we find out you're lying about Rourke, well, the next visit won't be this civil." Ethan tightened his grip on the shotgun. "I don't care who you are. You threaten me on my land, you'll regret it." A heartbeat later, the tension snapped. The second man spurred his horse forward with a savage yell, drawing a pistol in the same breath. Ethan braced himself and pulled the trigger of the shotgun, unleashing a thunderous roar that echoed across the open plains. The horse reared, the rider twisting to avoid the buckshot. Blevins dove to the ground, cursing. A flash of muzzle fire erupted from the rider's gun, the bullet whizzing past Ethan's ear. Instinct took over, and Ethan pumped another shell. Before he could fire, Blevins scrambled to his feet, hissing, "Fall back." They retreated into the darkness, but not before sending a final wild shot that shattered a porch post. When silence returned, Ethan's muscles felt like water. He lowered the shotgun slowly, listening for any sign they'd looped back, but all he heard was the distant thunder of galloping hooves. Inside, Lily trembled beside a broken lamp that had fallen in the chaos. Ethan rushed to her side, pulling her into a shaky embrace. The message was clear. Bounty hunters were circling, and they had no intention of playing by the rules. Blood had been spilled, lines had been drawn, and their fragile sense of safety was disintegrating by the minute. The next morning, sunlight revealed the damage, a splintered porch post, bullet holes in the barn door, and scattered shell casings in the yard. Lily helped Ethan pick up the debris in subdued silence. They both knew the ranch was no longer safe. Those men would be back, and they wouldn't come alone. Sitting at the rickety table with mugs of bitter coffee, Ethan voiced what they both already knew. "We need to leave." Lily's eyes brimmed with tears. "But where can we go?" Ethan rubbed the stubble on his chin, scanning a mental map of the region. "We can head south toward the Red River. I've got a friend, John Chisholm, who runs cattle along the Pecos. He's had run-ins with rustlers and outlaws before. He might shelter us for a while." Lily's brow furrowed. "Won't people ask questions?" "They might." Ethan conceded, but Chisholm's not the type to pry if he sees I'm in real trouble. He's seen the dark side of the West enough times to know how to keep quiet. They packed hastily. Lily stuffed her few belongings into the battered satchel, including the torn map that had sparked Ethan's initial suspicions. Ethan gathered supplies, dried beans, jerky canteens of water, and a spare revolver. Before leaving, he paused at the mantel where a faded tintype of Clara rested. The memories of his wife felt like a heavy anchor, but the moment demanded action, not reflection. "Be careful with that map," Lily said, her voice quavering as she noticed him glance at her satchel. "I think it belonged to my father. He used to say it was his ticket to a better life, but I never knew what he meant." Ethan gave a grim nod. "Maybe it's connected to whatever's fueling this bounty frenzy. Either way, let's get moving before more men show up asking the wrong questions." Within hours, Ethan hitched Marigold to the wagon, adding extra provisions and a small stash of coins he'd hidden in a loose floorboard. Lily perched quietly beside him, the battered satchel clutched to her chest. They set off at a brisk pace, leaving behind the homestead that had been both a sanctuary and a prison. The journey south was arduous under the scorching sun. Dust kicked up by the wagon wheels coated their throats and stung their eyes. They skirted Abilene, avoiding the main roads to dodge prying lawmen or bounty hunters. Each time they heard the distant thunder of hooves, they tensed hearts hammering until the sound faded away. By late afternoon on the second day, they spotted a lone rider approaching from the east. Fear twisted in Ethan's gut. Was this another hired gun come to claim the bounty on Conrad Rourke's daughter? He reached for his shotgun, ready for a fight. But as the rider drew near, a wave of relief washed over Ethan. It was Jeremiah Alcott. He reined in his horse-chestnut mane, glinting under the sun, and saluted with 2 fingers to his wide-brimmed hat. "Ethan, you sure picked a strange time for a trip," Jeremiah remarked, guiding his horse alongside the wagon. His voice held a cautious warmth. Lily shrank into her seat, trying to appear inconspicuous. Ethan made no effort to hide the tension in his posture. Had no choice, Jeremiah. Had some unwanted visitors at the ranch. Jeremiah's expression hardened. "I heard rumors some bounty hunters were sniffing around. You and the girl heading for safety." Ethan nodded, his lips pressed thin. "We're aiming for John Chisholm's spread. Maybe lay low for a spell." To Ethan's surprise, Jeremiah offered to ride with them part of the way. "2 guns are better than 1 out here," he said simply. Grateful for any friendly assistance, Ethan agreed. With Jeremiah's presence, the miles ahead felt slightly less daunting, though the danger was far from gone. That night, they made camp beneath a gnarled oak by a small creek. Jeremiah scouted the area to ensure no one was following, while Lily gathered stray branches for the campfire. Ethan rubbed down Marigold, the old horse, whickering in tired gratitude. The smell of wood smoke and the gentle murmur of flowing water offered a fleeting sense of peace. As they shared a simple meal of beans and jerky, Jeremiah asked about the map that Lily guarded so closely. Reluctantly, she pulled it from her satchel, the torn parchment smudged with dirt and faint water stains. She spread it out on a flat rock, the firelight flickering over faded ink lines. The map depicted a route meandering west from Abilene toward the desert plains. The word Sienna Wells was scrawled near the top with ants drawn in a remote canyon. Even Jeremiah scratched his head. He'd never heard of Sienna Wells, but he recognized the general area bleak territory filled with rattlesnakes and cacti far from civilization. "Your pa ever say what was out there?" Jeremiah asked Lily. She shook her head. "He just said it was our ticket out of a life on the run. But he never told me what that meant. When the Pinkertons nearly caught us in Dodge City, he tucked this map in my satchel and said, 'If something happens to me, go there.' But I got separated from him before he could explain." Ethan and Jeremiah exchanged a glance. Could this map lead to a hidden stash of stolen loot, or was it some kind of safe haven? Either way, Lily's father clearly believed it was valuable enough to pass to her in a moment of crisis. A breeze whipped through the campfire, sending sparks swirling into the night. None of them said it out loud, but the same question weighed on their minds. Would Conrad Rourke find them before they uncovered the truth behind Sienna Wells? They broke camp at first light, pressing on into arid terrain. The morning sun baked the earth, mirages shimmering on the horizon. Sagebrush dotted the plains, and the occasional vulture soared overhead, a silent omen of the harshness of the land. Jeremiah rode ahead, scouting for trouble, while Ethan guided the wagon. Lily sat in back, scanning the rocky slopes and dusty gullies with anxious eyes. Around midday, they approached a narrow pass flanked by tall, jagged rock formations. The wind howled between the crags, creating a natural bottleneck in the trail. That's when gunfire erupted from above, echoing off the rocks. Bullets kicked up dust near the wagon wheels, and Lily screamed, diving for cover. Ethan snapped the reins, urging Marigold forward. Jeremiah wheeled his horse around, returning fire at the unseen attackers. "Keep moving!" Jeremiah shouted over the thunderous cracks of rifles. Ethan risked a glance upward. He glimpsed a shadow perched on a high ledge, one of the ambushers reloading. Another shot whizzed past, splintering the wagon's side. Lily clung to the floor, eyes squeezed shut in terror. Jeremiah spurred his horse toward the rock face, trying to flank the attackers. Ethan urged the wagon into a hard gallop, the wheels rattling dangerously over uneven ground. More shots rained down, but the angle was steep, and the men above struggled to aim at a moving target. Just as they neared the pass's exit, a bullet found its mark, nicking one of the wagon's wheels. With a sickening crack, the wheel gave way, sending the wagon listing to one side. Ethan cursed, fighting to keep control of Marigold. Jeremiah managed to dislodge one attacker from the cliff by firing relentlessly. The man tumbled down the slope, landing with a hard thud. But the second attacker kept firing, pinning Jeremiah behind a boulder. They were in a deadly standoff, the pass strewn with dust, shouting men, and a wounded wagon. In the chaos, Lily's terrified scream cut through Ethan's heart like a knife. Trapped by the wrecked wagon and pinned down by gunfire, Ethan feared their journey would end here in a hail of bullets. He tried to reload his shotgun, but the swirling dust made it impossible to see. Lily clutched the torn map to her chest. Panic etched on her face. Suddenly a shot rang out from the opposite direction, unexpected, powerful. The man on the high ledge jerked as if struck by lightning and toppled out of view. Another shot, and the pass fell silent. Whoever had fired those bullets had precise aim. Jeremiah cautiously poked his head from behind the boulder, weapon still raised. "Who's there?" he yelled, voice echoing. A lone rider emerged around the bend, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a dusty hat pulled low over his eyes. The butt of a rifle jutted from his saddle, smoke curling from the barrel. As he drew closer, Ethan's pulse pounded. Something about the man's bearing sent a chill through him. When he finally pulled up next to the wagon, Ethan recognized him from old wanted posters, Conrad Rourke. Lily stared in shock, tears welling up as she whispered, "Pa Rourke." His face, etched with lines of exhaustion, nodded curtly. "Easy, Lily. I've been tracking you since I heard about bounty hunters sniffing around." He glanced at Jeremiah and Ethan warily. "Figured you'd need some help." Ethan's mind spun. This was the notorious outlaw, the man they'd been fleeing from, and yet hoping to find answers about. Rourke dismounted and walked toward Lily, who scrambled free from the wagon. She flung her arms around him despite her fear and confusion. The father held his daughter in a brief, tense embrace. Then he turned to Ethan, rifle still in hand. "Thanks for keeping her safe," Rourke said quietly. "But if we're gonna get out of this alive, we need to move. Those two shooters were just scouts. More will be coming." With the ambushers taken care of, the group found themselves in a precarious alliance. Jeremiah eyed Conrad Rourke with understandable suspicion, his hand never far from his holster. Ethan's feelings were more complicated. Here was Lily's father, the wanted man, whose bounty had set the West on fire with rumors and bloodshed. While Jeremiah worked to repair the damaged wagon wheel using a spare from the wagon bed, Rourke pulled Ethan aside. His gaze flicked to Lily, who sat under the shade of a rock, sipping water and trying to steady her nerves. "She's been talking about you," Rourke began. eyes narrowed. How you took her in? Ethan shrugged. I couldn't leave her alone. Rourke nodded, swallowing hard. I'm grateful for that. But I need you to understand something. I never wanted Lily involved in my affairs. This life, it's cursed. It's that map she carries, he said, nodding in Lily's direction. It's not just some random scribble. It leads to Sienna Wells, a place where I believe my share of an old heist is hidden enough money to vanish, start over somewhere. I was close to cashing out when the Pinkertons closed in. Ethan found himself torn between compassion and anger. Then why involve Lily at all? Rourke's voice dropped, filled with regret. I didn't plan to. She was living with my sister going to school. I only picked her up when I realized my old partners were planning to double-cross me. I feared they'd use her to force my hand. He let out a shaky breath. By the time I realized the Pinkertons were also closing in, it was too late. I got separated from Lily and, well, the rest you know. Despite every instinct telling him to run from this man, Ethan found himself nodding. Perhaps Lily's father wasn't the simple villain the posters made him out to be, but that didn't diminish the danger lurking around every bend. Once Jeremiah finished repairing the wagon wheel, the small group deliberated their next move. Lily clung to her father's side, her wariness softened by the relief of finding him alive. Jeremiah, however, made no secret of his mistrust. I'm not riding with a wanted criminal, Jeremiah stated flatly, arms crossed. I came to help Ethan, not help some outlaw run from the law. Rourke's eyes hardened, but he kept his tone measured. I understand. But there's a price on my head put there by men who don't care if I'm innocent or guilty. To them, I'm just a payout. Jeremiah scoffed. Innocent. You robbed stagecoaches, Rourke. Rourke didn't deny it. Yes, I did. But there's more to it than just greed. The railroad barons I targeted have stolen land from folks all across the West, manipulated laws, bribed judges. You think they're squeaky clean people like me? We're just on the losing end of a rigged game. A tense silence followed. Ethan, torn between loyalty to Jeremiah and concern for Lily, stepped in. We don't have time for moral debates. Bounty hunters are on our tail. If we can get to Sienna Wells, maybe Rourke can retrieve what he needs and vanish. Then Lily can have a shot at a normal life. Lily's gaze flitted between them. I just want to be safe, she said, softly, tears in her voice. Jeremiah finally sighed, kicking at the dirt. Fine. But I'm not making promises. If the law catches up, I'm not standing in their way. With that uneasy truce established, they resumed their journey. Rourke rode alongside the wagon, scanning the horizon for threats. Tension coiled among them all. Each man with his own motives, Lily caught in the balance. The shadow of danger never lifted, and the dust-choked wind carried an unspoken question. Would any of them emerge unscathed from this harrowing trek? 3 days later, they reached the barren wasteland marked on the map as Sienna Wells. The sun beat down mercilessly, the white-hot sky devoid of clouds. A half-collapsed windmill and a dried-up stone well were the only landmarks. Around them the land stretched into scrubby emptiness. Rourke rode ahead, studying the map against the rocky terrain. This should be it, he said, dismounting. Lily clutched his hand, fear etched in her eyes. They explored the area, eventually discovering a hidden crevice near a rock outcrop. Rourke led them inside, where the air was refreshingly cool. There, tucked away behind fallen stones, was a small wooden chest, locked with rusted iron. Dust motes swirled as he pried it open with the butt of his rifle. Inside lay a modest fortune gold coins, bundles of old banknotes, and a few pieces of jewelry. Lily gasped, having never seen such wealth. Jeremiah and Ethan exchanged grim looks. This was the stolen loot that countless lawmen, Pinkertons, and bounty hunters had been searching for. Rourke gently lifted a pouch of coins, turning to Lily. "This was always meant for you, to give you a better life." Before Lily could respond, the sudden echo of horse hooves thundered outside. Shouts and whoops reverberated through the canyon. Blevins and several other men, likely the same bounty hunters from before, had caught up to them. Gunshots cracked bullets ricocheting off rock walls. Jeremiah swore, grabbing his rifle. Ethan shielded Lily as Rourke rushed to the cave entrance, unleashing a hail of fire. The confrontation escalated into a violent standoff. The bounty hunters taking cover behind boulders, returning volleys of gunfire. Dust filled the air, and the acrid smell of spent ammunition stung their nostrils. Trapped in the narrow confines of the cave with nowhere to run, it seemed their final showdown had come. Pinned down by relentless gunfire, Ethan and Jeremiah took turns peering around the jagged rocks to fire back. Lily crouched behind Rourke, who shielded her with his body. The stolen fortune, scattered across the cave floor, glinted mockingly in the dim light. Rourke clenched his jaw. "I'll hold them off as long as I can. You all get Lily out of here." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "No, Pa. Come with us." He turned to her, cupping her face gently. "Darling, I've spent my life running. If it ends here, at least I'll know you've got a chance to live free." Ethan gripped Rourke's shoulder. "We can fight together." A fierce resolve shone in Rourke's eyes. "No, they're here for me, not for you. I won't let Lily pay for my sins." Bullets rained into the cave, and Rourke, with a final nod, burst out into the open, firing mercilessly. His sudden offensive drew the bounty hunters' attention, giving Jeremiah and Ethan a small window to slip Lily through a side opening in the rocks. Over the din of gunfire, Lily sobbed, calling out for her father. Jeremiah had to practically drag her away. Moments later, a single shot rang out louder than the rest, followed by a chilling silence. Ethan's stomach lurched. He knew without seeing what it meant. They found cover behind an outcropping, hearts pounding. When the dust finally settled Blevins, and the remaining bounty hunters were either down or gone, Lily broke free from Jeremiah's grasp, rushing back into the cave. She found Rourke lying by the wooden chest, a bullet wound in his chest. He managed a weak smile upon seeing her. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his breath ragged. Tears streamed down Lily's cheeks. She clutched his hand as life slipped away. In his final moments, Conrad Rourke's eyes reflected a mix of regret and relief. Perhaps in death he'd finally found a form of redemption. In the hush after the gunfire, Lily cried into Ethan's arms, torn between sorrow and an unexpected sense of peace. Through this harrowing journey, they had discovered that sometimes the fiercest battles are fought within the heart, and that an outlaw's label can hide a soul seeking redemption. Jeremiah, solemn and humbled by the day's violence, helped gather what was left of Conrad Rourke's fortune, enough to ensure Lily could start a new life, free from the shadows of her father's past. As they prepared to leave Sienna Wells, the sun set in a blaze of crimson, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. In that final moment, Ethan vowed to guard Lily's future, no matter where it took them. And somewhere on that silent wind, it felt as though Rourke's spirit found peace at last. If this story gripped your heart and kept you on the edge of your seat, please like, share and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more riveting tales of courage, redemption, and the wild frontier where every twist of fate leads to extraordinary destinies.